Welcome back to Steel City Sports. So the NBA offseason is in full effect. We already had our first trade with Caruso and Giddey getting swapped, but this feels like the real first massive move of the offseason. You know, the first of the dominoes starting to fall with the New York Knicks trading for Mikal Bridges for basically 4 first-round picks and the contract of Bogdanovich. I'm guessing he's probably going to get bought out or something. I don't think he's going to be with the Nets really long. He was there a while ago, so he does go back. But obviously, this is about Mikal Bridges. This is a massive move for the Knicks. And right now, I feel like the New York Knicks are the clear number 2 team in the Eastern Conference after trading for Bridges. You know, the Celtics, the reigning champions, I think that they're still going to be the best team in the East next year, but this move, I think, really does move the needle of the Knicks, where I feel like they were kind of on the same tier of teams like Philly. You know, Philly was competitive with the Knicks in that playoff series, even though Embiid was dealing with injuries. I felt like they were kind of still on the same level of the Milwaukee Bucks. Maybe you can even throw like the Pacers in there because they did beat them in the playoffs. But for now, I think after trading for Bridges, they have now really pulled ahead as the clear-cut number 2 team in the Eastern Conference behind Boston. And they're a team right now that, at least on paper, I think they're good enough to get to an NBA Finals. Now, if they can really win an NBA Finals, you know, beating one of those top-tier elite Western Conference teams, whether it's Denver or Minnesota or Dallas or whatever team comes out of the West, that's a different conversation. But just in terms of the East, this team is good enough to get to the NBA Finals. I really do see it that way. They have probably the best depth in the NBA now. I don't think that they're done, though. I don't think that their moves are over in terms of this offseason. You know, there's still a potential for Julius Randle to be moved. I think he was one of the biggest losers of the playoffs because basically the Knicks went on that great run without him. He didn't play a second in the playoffs, and yet they got to a Game 7 of the second round. Probably should have been in the conference final had they not, you know, just physically fallen apart. So I think they can still be trying to – they could be actively shopping Julius Randle, who now kind of doesn't really – I don't think Julius Randle's a great fit for this New York Knicks team. When you look at the identity of their team in terms of playing defense and, you know, scrappy and all that just – Julius Randle does not come to mind when I think of that. It very much fits the culture of the Villanova guys, which is why they went all in on getting the Villanova guys. Now having all 4 of them, DiVincenzo, Josh Hart, Jalen Brunson, and now Mikal Bridges. So this is a sweet move for the Knicks. I do want to touch on this for the Nets side of things, though, definitely, because it looked like they could maybe be going down the route of trying to build a team around Mikal Bridges, which I thought would have been a massive mistake. I like Mikal Bridges a lot, but he's not good enough to really lead your team, be your franchise building block. And at least from like the rumors, the reports, it made it sound like the Nets were going to try to trade or sign like a star name to pair with Bridges. And I think that team would have had a very low ceiling. Like, even if you take some of the best names that are going to be free agents, like Paul George, what would Paul George and Mikal Bridges do in Brooklyn? Nothing. So I'm glad that they chose the route of let's just embrace the full rebuild. Let's try to get some draft capital back after we basically gave away all of our picks to Houston for James Harden. And I hope that they've now learned, after going through this mess 2 times now in the past decade, you know, trading for Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett. Those picks turned out to be Tatum and Brown. They just won a title. And then they did it again, signing KD, Kyrie, and trading all their picks for Harden. So hopefully they now realize that that's not the way to build an NBA team, trying to just trade for these star names. Hopefully they go on to just try to really build their team back up through the draft over time, because they've had some of the biggest disasters in NBA history, especially the Kevin Durant Big 3 with Harden and Kyrie. We did a video on that a while back, just talking about how big of a disaster that was for the Nets franchise. So this is kind of, it feels like the final chapter of the Kevin Durant saga. You know, Miles Bridges was really the prized possession of the Nets in their return for KD, and now he's finally been, you know, traded, and they get 4 first-round picks in return. As for who won this trade, I definitely think the Knicks did win it. Anytime you're trading like a good young player like Mikal Bridges, I usually want there to be like more of a tangible piece attached to it, but in this case, you just look at the Nets. They're desperate for draft capital, so it makes a lot of sense. It's going to take a while to see who won the trade in the long term because we have to see who these picks turn out to be for the Brooklyn Nets. Because at the time, whenever they traded for Harden, I thought the Rockets got fleeced, completely fleeced. I was like, you didn't get anything tangible for James Harden, who at that time was easily a top 5 player in the NBA. I was like, all you got was picks. You didn't get any tangible young pieces. And I remember making videos all the way back then. It wasn't on this channel. It was on an older channel that no longer exists. Ranting about how incompetent the Rockets were for not getting a great return for Harden. And now when you look at that trade, it actually looks like the Nets were the ones that got fleeced in that trade because James Harden only played there for like a year, half of 2021 and half of 2022. Basically a season he was there. So in terms of this trade, we're just going to have to wait and see how things play out. But I think the New York Knicks are a fierce competitor now. And like I said, they have one of the deepest rotations in the NBA now with Jalen Brunson at your one. They're obviously going to want to bring back OG, who's going to want, he wants the Brinks truck, he wants a bag, but I think he's going to get that bag. He's the perfect player for Tom Thibodeau's system. So you'll probably have OG at the 2, Mikal Bridges at the 3. At the 4, if they decide to keep Julius Randle, he would be there. In the 5, you'd have either Hartenstein or Mitchell Robinson. Hartenstein was really good this year. I'm pretty sure his contract is up as well. You guys will have to let me know down in the comments about Hartenstein. Is his contract up? Because he feels like a guy that could be a casualty of the Mikal Bridges trade in terms of there's just not enough money to go to him. But even if he does go, you'd have Robinson at the center, and then you'd have, great bench depth of Josh Hart, Dante DiVincenzo, Miles McBride, who was really good in the playoffs, Precious Achua. So this is one of the best deep teams in terms of just the versatility all these guys have. They all fit Thibodeau's system really well outside of Julius Randle, I think. So this is an exciting trade for sure. So now that we've talked about that, I want to get into a couple of rumors that I've seen. So this first rumor that I saw is now starting to blow up on NBA Twitter and NBA Instagram between all the reports. And it's basically directly related to what we just talked about because it was the guy who was traded for Mikal Bridges, Kevin Durant. It's looking like a real possibility that KD could be on a new team next year. Right now, the name or the team being thrown around is the Houston Rockets. That's like just way out of left field. Like if he ends up on Houston, that is just kind of a mind-blowing thing right there. I never expected KD to be one of those guys, especially while he's still in his prime. I do still consider KD to be in his prime. Like the guy still averaged like 28 last year on great efficiency. And even though the Suns got swept, KD was really the only player on the team that showed up for all 4 games. I know Devin Booker was really good in Game 4 with 49 points, but KD was really their only player that showed up on a night-in, night-out basis in that series against the Timberwolves. So, yeah, I do still consider KD to be in his prime. I never would have thought he'd be a guy who just jumped around from team to team towards the end of his prime, leaving the Warriors, going to Brooklyn for a couple of years, then going to the Suns. If he ends up on the Rockets now, it's like, it's just sad to see happen because I honestly do believe that if Kevin Durant would have never left the Golden State Warriors, he would be easily considered a top 10 player of all time because he'd have at least 2 or 3 more rings. I am a Warriors fan, but I'm not saying that because I'm a Warriors fan. I'm saying that because look at his track record since he's left the Warriors. It's been an undeniable, unmitigated fucking disaster since he's left the Warriors. Has completely, I think, jeopardized his legacy. I mean, they catered everything in Brooklyn to Kevin Durant. They brought in the players he wanted. They hired the coach he wanted in Steve Nash. Then when he changed his mind out of the blue and no longer liked Steve Nash, they fired his ass for him. They paid him. They paid his buddies. They did everything in Brooklyn for Kevin Durant. They catered to his every need, and he still gave them a giant middle finger and said, fuck you, I want out. So that was a disaster. He cratered that franchise, then goes to the Suns. And I think it's safe to say ever since Kevin Durant has been on the Suns, they have been a disappointment. You look at his half of a year in 2023 when he was there, they didn't really do much. They beat an injured Clippers team in the first round, and then they did put up a fight against the eventual champion Nuggets, but ultimately did lose in the second round. And then this year, they got swept in the first round of the playoffs. And I now think that the Big Three era, the blueprint of constructing a Big Three to win a title, that was already a thing of a bygone era. I already think that was, no longer a winning recipe in today's NBA. But I think that this Suns team really was the final nail in the coffin of that, because if they do decide to blow things up in Phoenix and get rid of Kevin Durant, what a fucking disaster this was, this whole experiment with KD. And I saw a quote from Stephen A. Smith. Now, I don't know how reliable Stephen A. is as a journalist. Obviously he's really popular. He's probably the most popular sports analysis guy out there. He had a quote that came out today that said the Phoenix Suns behind closed doors are done with Kevin Durant. I don't know how realistic that is, how legitimate it is, but Stephen A. said that. This wasn't some random guy on Twitter who said this. This is Stephen A. Smith, the most popular sports analysis guy on the planet, said behind closed doors, the Phoenix Suns are done. They want out of the Kevin Durant business. Why that is, I don't know, because I still think Kevin Durant is easily a top 10 player in the world right now, despite the weird stuff he is with the locker room. He's not the best leader, just in terms of his play, flat out stud. Still one of my favorite players of all time. But what a mess. If he ends up getting traded to Houston, it's going to be a fun team if he would end up with Houston. But, obviously some of the young guys are going to be traded to Phoenix for him. They're going to have to give up some of that draft capital, maybe even some of the Brooklyn picks that they have to bring KD in. And I just don't see that being a very high ceiling team. I think it'd be really fun. They'd have some exciting moments. But in terms of raising a trophy, I don't see that. Jalen Green had a nice stretch of this season. Jabari Smith showed flashes. Sengun has shown flashes of greatness. But KD at his ripe age, I think he's 35, 36 now, is clearly not good enough to lead a young team to the promised land, because he can't even do it right now with Devin Booker and Bradley Beal, who are looked at as still really high-end players. So that's I think the most interesting topic of the offseason is, will Kevin Durant be moved yet again to another team, whether it is Houston or somewhere else? If I'm him, I would try to force my way back to the Warriors. Again, I'm a Warriors fan, but I think that was Kevin Durant's greatest mistake, was leaving the Warriors. I think he'd have at least another 2 or 3 rings on his resume. And he obviously wouldn't have the stains on his resume of cratering the Brooklyn Nets franchise, and as of right now being an abject failure with the Phoenix Suns. So you guys let me know how realistic you think it is with Kevin Durant. But the only reason I kind of took this somewhat seriously is the fact that Stephen A. said, yeah, the Suns, they want out of the KD business. So definitely going to look forward to seeing if something happens with that. And the last topic I wanted to touch on for today's video was the Paul George rumors. Apparently the Clippers don't want to pay Paul George a full max contract. Now, I can kind of see the argument for not doing it. You could say he's on the wrong side of 30. He's going to start regressing. He's had a lot of injuries, and it's clear that the current rendition of this Clippers team is not good enough to win a title. I think even Steve Ballmer would tell you in his heart of hearts, this team is not good enough to win a title. If they weren't good enough to win it like 3 or 4 years ago, whenever Kawhi and PG were younger and better, and they had a better overall, deeper team, if they couldn't get it done then, I think it would be kind of naive to think in the year 2025 that this Clippers team is going to win a title. So I can see some of the arguments against wanting to pay Paul George. However, my argument is, what's the alternative? What is the replacement plan for Paul George? Because if you let Paul George walk, then your team is a 35-year-old James Harden and Kawhi Leonard, who really doesn't play much. I mean, this was the relatively healthiest season I think he's had as a Los Angeles Clipper. I can't remember, but he did play a lot this year. But if you lose Paul George, you have old Harden and old Kawhi. Like, what's the ceiling of that team? At least with Paul George, I give the Clippers like a puncher's chance of winning the title. I don't think it's a very high chance. I would say like maybe a 5 or 10% chance they have of winning the title next year if Paul George is there. But if Paul George is gone, I think it's a 0% chance. I think you can even argue Paul George has been the best player on the Clippers for years now. He's had his problems with his injuries, but he's definitely more available than Kawhi, and he's been more consistent than Kawhi and led that team to a conference final appearance in 2021, beating that great one-seeded Jazz team. And when I say great, I mean in terms of the regular season. They were a dominant regular season team, and then Paul George was able to lead that Clippers team to beat them. I still think that was one of the crowning achievements of Paul George's career, leading the Clippers to their only conference final appearance ever. So that's kind of my thing with the Clippers is, I can see some arguments of like doubling down with this team, but the alternative is far too bleak, and if I'm the Clippers, I'm giving Paul George whatever he wants, especially when you're opening that new stadium. You want to attract people to come play for the Clippers and come watch the Clippers. And it's weird that the main hang-up is money because they have by far the richest owner in the NBA, Steve Ballmer, one of the founders of fucking Microsoft. So, you would think money would not be a problem with the LA Clippers, but that seems to be the thing that they are hung up on with their negotiations. Now, at the end of the day, I still think he's going to end up a Clipper. I don't see how Clippers management could let him go because, like I said, the ceiling of your team, you're automatically dropped a couple tiers down. I'd probably put them as a tier 2 team in the NBA right now. If you lose Paul George, you're like tier 3, tier 4 team in the NBA. You automatically are no longer a contending team. Even though I think it's slight now, it's 0 when he's gone. So I did want to talk about a couple teams Paul George could potentially end up on if he's not going to be with the Clippers. I still think the favorite outside of LA would be the Sixers. If I'm the Sixers, I would be all in on Paul George because it's clear that the current construction of the Philadelphia 76ers, they're not even close to being a real contender because we saw it in that Knicks series. They only really stand a chance of winning a playoff game if Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey play flawless games, which is not a realistic expectation to have of your two best players. Embiid and Maxey both have to have A-plus performances for Philly to even stand a chance. So for me, I would be all in on Paul George. He's exactly the type of player you need, and the role would fit him perfectly because he wouldn't be expected to be like the guy with the Sixers. He'd probably be their third scoring option behind Maxey and Embiid. So I think that the fit would be incredible. I think it'd be mutually beneficial to both sides. So I don't know why the Sixers wouldn't be all in on Paul George. That would be, for me, if I'm Daryl Morey, it's like there is no alternative. We need Paul George. We have to do everything in our power to get him. Another team that I just saw popping up a little more recently is my team, the Warriors. I don't know how realistic that is. I would be very shocked if it happened. I would love it, of course, being a Warriors fan. Sign me up for that any day. I think it really stems from the fact that they don't want to pay Klay Thompson. I'm pretty confident that Klay's not going to come back. I think Klay Thompson, in his mind, just he sees himself as more valuable than I think the Warriors do. And it's no knock on Klay Thompson. He's a champion. He's an all-time great player. But it's clear he's past his prime. As a Warriors fan, I don't have a problem moving off Klay. And I definitely don't have a problem moving off Klay if it means we're going to get Paul George, especially like in a sign-and-trade move. Now, if I'm the Clippers, why the fuck would I want Klay Thompson over Paul George in 2025? The 2024-2025 season. Like, Paul George does everything better on a basketball court than Klay right now, except for probably, Klay's probably in a vacuum a better three-point shooter still, but that's a very close margin at this point in time. Literally everything else, Paul George is better than Klay Thompson. And some of the things like handling, finishing, athleticism, it's not even close. Defending, Klay's defense, I think, is kind of shot now. If I'm the Clippers, why the hell would I want to do that? But if you're the Warriors, 100%. Paul George, in my opinion, is still a top 15, top 20 guy in the NBA. Whereas Clay, I don't even know if he cracks the top 50 at this point in time. I really don't. He's just too streaky. So from the Warriors' perspective, hell yeah, give me that. Sign me up for that move any day if it's a sign and trade or whatever, or if you're just bringing him in. And you could also make a couple other moves with the younger guys like Pods, like Kuminga, like Moody. So the Warriors, they're definitely a team to watch for the offseason. And then another one, there's the Knicks, but I think after they traded for Mikal, I don't think they're a realistic spot for Paul George now. Maybe like the Magic. They're a team that overachieved last year. If they want to go out there and get a more solidified guy, I wouldn't like that for PG because, like I said, I want him to go to a spot where there's not a lot of pressure on him. And with Orlando, he would probably be viewed as the guy. Even though it is Paolo's team, he's the vet guy. He's the perennial all-star guy. And I just don't know how high of a ceiling that would be. So as a fan of Paul George, Paul George has been one of my favorite players for basically since I started watching basketball. So as a fan of Paul George, I would like to see him on either my Warriors or the Sixers. I think both those teams give him a better chance of winning a title than the current Clippers team. But if I had to bet, I think he's going to get a deal done with the Clippers. Like I said, the management, the ownership, there's no way you can let that guy go. So that's been it for today's video. I just kind of wanted to ramble about these topics. This is always such a fascinating time of year to see what players go where. If you want, you can let me know down in the comments if you want to see me talk about some other rumors. I definitely want to do a video about Trae Young because I've been seeing a lot of stuff heat up with that. But I'm also going to be having my ranking video I do every year after every NBA season where I rank the top 25 players. So stay tuned for all those videos. We're going to be doing a lot more NFL stuff as well. So if you made it this far, really appreciate you listening. Please like and subscribe.